What would you do if the very child you carried in your arms, the one you sacrificed everything for, looked you in the eye and said, "I'm too busy to be there for you," on the day you needed them most? That's what happened to me. My name is Dorothy, I'm 72 years old, and I thought I had raised a son who would never turn his back on me. But 3 days after he told me he couldn't help me recover from surgery, I discovered something that shook me to my core. My Michael was lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life and hiding secrets I never thought possible. I want to share this story with you, not just because it's mine, but because I believe every parent, every child, and every grandparent will find a piece of themselves in it. It's a story of sacrifice, disappointment, betrayal, and yes, shocking truth. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever felt abandoned by the very person you gave everything to? If so, then you'll understand the storm I walked through. But first, before we step into my world, please subscribe to this channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear your story too. I wasn't born into comfort. I grew up in the rolling fields of Kentucky, where hard work wasn't a choice, it was survival. My hands, now wrinkled and slow, once knew the weight of farm tools and the ache of cold mornings. Life taught me grit early, but it also taught me love. I met Arthur, my husband, in our little hometown, and together we dreamed of something more than long days in the dirt. We didn't have much, but we built a life brick by brick. Eventually, we moved into a small bungalow in Cincinnati, Ohio. That's where we raised our only child, Michael. From the moment I held him, I swore I'd give him the kind of life I never had. I patched old clothes instead of buying new ones, worked double shifts when money ran thin, and skipped meals so he could eat. Every choice Arthur and I made was for Michael's future. When Arthur passed away 5 years ago, my world felt smaller, but Michael became my anchor. He was my reason to keep moving, my only family left. For years, he called every Sunday. I lived for those phone calls, hearing his voice, listening to stories about his job in technology. I didn't always understand the details, but just knowing he thought of me kept my heart steady. At least, that's what I believed. When my doctor told me I needed knee replacement surgery, I wasn't scared of the operation itself. What weighed on me was the recovery. A few days of care, someone to help me move around, cook a simple meal, maybe sit with me when the pain grew sharp. For the first time in my life, I had to ask my son for help. I called Michael, expecting him to say yes without hesitation. After all, hadn't I spent decades saying yes to every need he ever had? But his answer wasn't what I imagined. His voice was rushed, distracted. "Mom, I wish I could, but I've got a huge deadline at work. I just can't take the time right now." Those words landed harder than any physical pain I'd ever felt. I told him I understood, but in truth, I didn't. How could my only son, the boy I had given everything for, tell me he was too busy to help me through surgery? Agnes, my neighbor, stepped in and took care of me instead. Without her kindness, I don't know what I would have done. But the sting of Michael's refusal lingered. Little did I know, only 3 days later, everything would change, and the truth I uncovered would turn my world upside down. 3 days passed. I thought the worst thing in my life was my son's refusal, but I was wrong. That phone call replayed in my mind every night, and I convinced myself maybe he truly was overwhelmed with work. I wanted to believe there was still a good reason, something that would explain away the hurt. Then came the silence. No Sunday call. No message. Just an empty phone line that felt heavier than the cast on my knee. When I finally learned where my son really was, my heart nearly stopped. Michael wasn't working on a deadline. He wasn't too busy to care for me. He was lying in a hospital bed, clinging to life after a devastating accident, and hiding secrets that would make me question everything I thought I knew about him. This story isn't only about a mother's heartbreak. It's about discovery, betrayal, and a shocking truth that tested the meaning of family. Stay with me, because what I found out in the days that followed will leave you questioning the bonds of blood and the weight of loyalty. I was born in the hills of Kentucky, in a home that barely stood against winter winds. Childhood in those days wasn't about comfort or ease, it was about survival. My parents worked the land with determination, and I learned young that food on the table came only after long hours of labor. I carried buckets of water from the well, tended chickens, and rose before the sun to help with chores. Those early years shaped me into someone who knew the meaning of hard work, but they also planted in me a yearning. I wanted more for the family I would one day have. By the time I turned 18, life felt like it might stretch on forever with nothing but fields, dirt roads, and exhaustion. That's when Arthur appeared in my life. He wasn't wealthy or well-dressed, but he had a steadiness about him. He worked at the local mill, his clothes worn thin from long shifts, his hands calloused, yet his eyes carried ambition. He told me once that he wanted to build something of his own, something lasting. His dream wasn't about riches. It was about dignity. I believed him, and I believed in him. We married young, two dreamers with little more than hope to our names. The early years tested us. We rented a cramped apartment above a hardware store, the ceiling so low Arthur had to duck in places. I worked at a diner, serving coffee and pie for tips that barely covered groceries. Arthur would come home smelling of sawdust and machine oil, his arms covered in nicks from the mill. Yet, even on the hardest nights, we found laughter. We had each other, and for us, that was enough. After years of saving and stretching every dollar, we managed to buy a modest house in Cincinnati. It had 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen with peeling linoleum, and a porch that squeaked when you stepped on it. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary, but to us it was a palace. Not long after, our son Michael was born. The moment I held him in my arms, everything shifted. Suddenly, every long day and every sacrifice seemed worth it, because here was the reason for it all. Michael became the center of our world. Arthur and I poured every ounce of energy into giving him a life better than ours. If we had to patch old clothes to save for his school supplies, we did it. If it meant skipping meals so he could eat, we went hungry without complaint. Every decision circled back to him. We dreamed big for him. College, a career, a life free from the worry that had marked our own. Arthur would come home late from work, exhausted, but the moment Michael toddled over to him, his whole face would light up. I would sit at the kitchen table, sewing patches onto Arthur's shirts, and watch the two of them on the floor playing with wooden blocks. Those small, quiet moments made the sacrifices feel like blessings. As Michael grew older, we noticed how curious and bright he was. He loved taking things apart just to see how they worked. Radios, clocks, even the old vacuum. Nothing was safe from his little hands. Instead of scolding him, Arthur encouraged it. "He's got a mind for building," he'd say with pride. I remember one Christmas when all Michael wanted was a set of tools. We couldn't afford brand new ones, but Arthur found secondhand pieces, polished them, and wrapped them in newspaper. When Michael unwrapped them, his eyes shone brighter than any Christmas lights. School only confirmed what we already knew. Michael was gifted. Teachers praised his quick mind, and we knew we had to support him, no matter the cost. We funneled our savings into his education, working extra shifts, scrimping on groceries, and cutting corners in every way we could. Arthur sometimes skipped doctor visits to save money, and I took on sewing and cleaning jobs around the neighborhood. We told ourselves it was temporary, that once Michael had his chance, the struggle would ease. When Michael was accepted into a top university, it felt like our years of sacrifice had paid off. I remember standing in the kitchen, the acceptance letter trembling in my hands, tears streaming down my face. Arthur hugged me, his rough hands gentle against my back, and said, "We did it. Our boy's going to make something of himself." Sending him off to school was both the proudest and hardest moment of my life. Our little bungalow felt unbearably quiet without him, but every call, every letter reassured me that we had done the right thing. Michael spoke about his classes, the projects he worked on, the professors who saw potential in him. Even when I didn't understand the technical details, just hearing his enthusiasm filled me with joy. But as the years passed, the sacrifices weighed heavily on Arthur. The long hours at the mill took a toll. His heart grew weak, and though he tried to hide it, I could see the strain. 5 years ago, he passed away. Losing him was like losing a part of myself. For weeks, I couldn't bear to sit on the porch we had built together. The silence in that house nearly broke me. Michael was my anchor during that time. He came home for the funeral, stood beside me, and promised we'd get through it together. In the months after, he called every Sunday without fail. Those calls became my lifeline. I lived for the sound of his voice, the updates about his work as a software developer, and the occasional stories of his travels. I didn't always understand his world, but it didn't matter. He was still my boy, still the child I had poured my life into. Looking back, I realized those years after Arthur's passing were when Michael and I grew closest. It felt like it was us against the world. I leaned on him for comfort, and he leaned on me for encouragement. I told myself that no matter what challenges came our way, family would hold us together. But love, sacrifice, and loyalty don't always guarantee closeness. Sometimes, despite everything you give, the bond you fought so hard to build begins to weaken. And you don't see it until the distance has already grown. Have you ever poured your entire life into someone, only to feel them slipping away? That was the ache I carried, long before the real heartbreak began. The years after Arthur's passing were marked by loneliness, but I carried on because I had Michael. His weekly calls gave me comfort, and even though he often spoke about being busy with projects, I still felt included in his life. For a long time, I told myself that as long as he remembered me, everything would be fine. But life has a way of testing bonds at the worst possible moments. When my doctor said I needed knee replacement surgery, I was nervous but not frightened. The procedure was routine. What worried me was the recovery. I was told I'd need someone to stay with me for a few days, help me move around, prepare meals, keep an eye on me in case I lost my balance. For the first time, I couldn't do everything on my own. I needed my son. I remember dialing his number, my hands trembling as the phone rang. When he answered, I tried to sound calm. "Michael, honey, I need to ask you something important. The doctor says I'll need help after surgery. Could you come stay with me for a few days?" There was silence on the line, followed by the sound of typing in the background. His voice was clipped, rushed. "Mom, I'd love to, but I'm in the middle of a huge project. The deadline is impossible to move. I can't take time off right now." The words cut straight through me. My heart sank. For years I had imagined that no matter what, Michael would be there when it truly mattered. Yet here I was, facing surgery alone. I tried to swallow my disappointment. "I understand," I said quietly. "Don't worry about it." He thanked me for understanding, as though I had spared him an inconvenience. After the call, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, the silence pressing down like a weight. Agnes, my kind neighbor, offered to help me. She cooked, stayed by my side, and made sure I didn't fall. Without her, I don't know how I would have managed. But every kindness she gave me only highlighted the absence of the person I truly wanted by my side. The surgery itself went well. The doctors were pleased with my recovery. But inside, I was broken in a way no operation could fix. Michael's refusal wasn't just a missed visit. It was a message. I wasn't his priority. Months later, another crisis tested our bond again. My small house, the one Arthur and I had worked so hard for, developed a deep crack along the foundation. The repair bill was staggering. I had some savings, but it would consume nearly half my retirement fund, money I had guarded carefully for decades. Nervously, I called Michael again. "Michael," I said, "the house needs major repairs. The foundation is cracking. It's going to cost more than I can manage alone. Could you come look at it with me? Maybe help figure out the best way." His response came swiftly, almost rehearsed. "Mom, I'm really swamped right now. I can't get away. Maybe you should talk to a loan officer or a contractor. They'll know what to do." No sympathy. No offer to drive down. Not even a suggestion that we sit and review it together. Just a casual dismissal, as though I were a stranger calling for a favor. I hung up the phone, my chest tight with disappointment. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I walked through my house, running my hands along the walls Arthur had painted, the windows we had saved to replace, the porch where we once sat together. The cracks in the foundation felt like cracks in my heart. This house was the symbol of our sacrifices, and Michael's indifference to it, and to me, was unbearable. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake wondering if I had failed somehow. Had I pushed him too hard toward success? Had I sheltered him so much that he forgot what it meant to show up for family? Or was I simply no longer important to him? The phone grew quiet in the weeks that followed. The Sunday calls that once brought me joy became less frequent, and eventually, they stopped altogether. I left voicemails, cheerful at first, then pleading, but none were returned. My son, my only child, was slipping away. Loneliness set in like a constant fog. Days blurred into one another. I busied myself with gardening, though even that lost its joy. Flowers grew, but I felt no pride in them. They were just another way to pass the hours. The silence of the house grew louder, and the absence of Michael's voice became unbearable. It was betrayal, not the kind you see in books, loud and obvious, but the quiet, suffocating betrayal of neglect. The boy I had raised with everything I had was too busy for me, too distracted to even answer my calls. The pain was worse than grief, because grief is honest. Neglect leaves you questioning your worth, wondering if you mattered at all. I share this part of my story with you because many of you know this feeling. You raise your children, pour into them everything you can, and one day you realize they've built a life where you no longer fit. Maybe you've felt the sting of being told, "I'm too busy." Maybe you've had a door closed in your face when all you needed was compassion. So let me ask you, if you were in my shoes, if your only child told you they couldn't be there when you needed them most, how would you feel? Would you forgive easily, or would that wound stay with you forever? Tell me in the comments. I read them all, and your stories matter. The weeks after Michael dismissed my worries about the house stretched into months. Each day I told myself he would call. I checked my phone every Sunday, certain I'd see his name light up the screen. But Sundays came and went with nothing but silence. At first, I left cheerful messages. "Hi honey, it's Mom. Just wanted to hear your voice." When those went unanswered, my tone grew heavier. "Michael, please call me back. I'm worried." Eventually, I stopped leaving messages altogether. It felt like shouting into the wind. The silence gnawed at me. I replayed every conversation we'd ever had, wondering if I had said something wrong. I thought back to his childhood, all the sacrifices Arthur and I made, and questioned if I had smothered him. Maybe I had pushed too hard for him to succeed, and this was his way of breaking free. Or maybe he simply no longer needed me. The thought was almost unbearable. Life became smaller. I filled the hours with chores, gardening, and the occasional visit with Agnes, but the loneliness was constant. Nights were the worst. I would sit in the dim light of the living room, staring at the phone, waiting for a call that never came. Then, one crisp autumn morning, an envelope arrived in the mail. It bore the name of a law firm in Cleveland I had never heard of. My first thought was that it had been sent by mistake. I nearly tossed it aside, but curiosity made me open it. Inside was a formal letter, its language cold and businesslike. It informed me that a large sum of money had been deposited into my bank account, an amount so staggering I read the letter twice, certain my eyes were deceiving me. According to the document, the money was a gift from an anonymous donor. My hands shook as I reached for the phone. I called my bank immediately, half expecting them to tell me it was a scam, but the representative confirmed the deposit was real. The money was sitting in my account, untouched and waiting. I felt no joy, no relief, only confusion and fear. Who would send me such a fortune? Why me? And why anonymously? My first thought was Michael, but that made no sense. He had told me time and again that he was too busy, too stretched thin, unable to help with even the simplest things. If he had this kind of wealth, why hadn't he said so? Why had he let me worry about paying for my house repairs, scraping by on a fixed income, while he stayed silent? The possibility filled me with suspicion. Was he in trouble? Was this money dirty in some way? The letter offered no answers, only a hollow assurance that the funds were legally transferred and mine to keep. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the letter spread out before me, staring at the numbers until they blurred. 1,000 questions swirled in my mind. Was this Michael's way of making amends without facing me? Was it his way of keeping me at a distance while easing his conscience? Or was something far worse going on, something he didn't want me to know? I tried calling him again, desperate for clarity. This time, the line wasn't just unanswered. It was disconnected. My son's number, the lifeline I had clung to for years, was no longer in service. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It wasn't just absence. It was finality. I sat there clutching the phone, feeling a dread I couldn't shake. If he wasn't avoiding me, then where was he? Agnes noticed my unease when she stopped by the next day. I showed her the letter, my voice trembling as I explained the situation. She frowned, tapping the paper thoughtfully. Money like this doesn't just fall into your lap. If it came from Michael, you deserve an explanation. And if it didn't, she didn't finish the sentence, but her silence spoke volumes. Her words only strengthened my resolve. I couldn't sit idly by, waiting for answers that might never come. If Michael had sent the money, I needed to know why. If he hadn't, then I needed to know who had, and what their intentions were. For days I wrestled with the decision, torn between fear of what I might discover and the desperate need for truth. In the end, love won out. Whatever secrets my son was keeping, whatever distance had grown between us, he was still my boy. I had to find him. So I packed a small bag, tucked the letter into my purse, and told Agnes I was visiting an old friend. The truth was, I was headed to Cleveland. I was going to the law firm listed on that envelope. I had to see for myself where this money had come from, and whether my son had anything to do with it. As the train pulled out of the station, I stared out the window at the passing fields and towns. My heart pounded with dread, but beneath it all was determination. For months I had lived with silence, with questions that hollowed me out from the inside. Now, at last, I was going to search for answers. I didn't know what I would find, but I knew this much. I could no longer accept silence as the final chapter. The train ride to Cleveland felt longer than it was. I clutched my purse tightly, the letter from the law firm tucked safely inside, though I must have unfolded and refolded a dozen times along the way. Every sound of the wheels grinding against the tracks seemed to echo my racing thoughts. I couldn't stop replaying the last conversation I'd had with Michael, the sharp disappointment in his voice when he said he was too busy to help me. How could the same man be tied to this enormous gift? When I finally arrived, the city felt overwhelming compared to my quiet neighborhood back home. I followed the directions printed on the letter, my heart hammering with every step. The address led me to a sleek, glass-fronted building that stretched toward the sky, its name etched in bold silver letters, Luminatech. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, staring at the sign. The name meant nothing to me, but the building itself was a monument to wealth and success. People in sharp suits hurried in and out, their voices brisk, their faces focused. This wasn't a place for someone like me, a 72-year-old widow with trembling hands and worn shoes. But if Michael was connected to this building, I had to walk inside. The receptionist greeted me with professional politeness, her smile tight. "How may I help you?" "I'm looking for my son," I said, my voice quivering. "His name is Michael Wilson. He works here, doesn't he?" She frowned, tapping quickly at her computer. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we don't have anyone by that name on our staff." The words struck like a physical blow. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Had I come all this way for nothing? Was the letter some cruel mistake? I gathered myself enough to ask again, my voice weaker this time. "Are you certain? He should be here. Please, could you check again?" Her expression didn't change. "No one by that name works here." I turned slowly, ready to leave, the weight of disappointment nearly dragging me to the floor. Just as I reached the door, a young woman rushed out of a glass-walled office. She stopped in her tracks when she saw me. "You're Michael's mother, aren't you?" she asked breathlessly. I froze, startled. Yes, I am." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I've seen your picture on his desk. My name is Maya. I'm his assistant." Relief and confusion collided inside me. The receptionist's denial, Maya's recognition, the letter. It was too much to process. "So he does work here?" I whispered. Maya nodded. "He doesn't just work here. He owns this company. He's the CEO of Luminatech." For a moment, the world tilted. My son, the boy who told me he was too busy to care for me after surgery, the man who dismissed my worries about my home, was not just employed here, but the head of it all. The polished building, the suits, the whispers of wealth, it all belonged to him. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the reception desk for balance as tears welled in my eyes. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, more to myself than to her. Maya hesitated, sympathy in her gaze. He's very private. He doesn't talk much about his personal life. But he spoke of you often, Dorothy. He kept that picture of you and your late husband on his desk. I don't think he ever stopped loving you. Her words only deepened the ache inside me. If he loved me, why had he lied? Why had he turned me away when I needed him most? The betrayal burned hotter than before. It wasn't just neglect. It was deceit. My son had built an empire and left me to believe he was drowning in work, too busy to lend me a few days of his time. I pressed her for answers. Where is he now? I need to see him. Maya's face fell. She glanced nervously at the receptionist, then back at me. Her eyes filled with tears, and in that instant, dread pooled in my stomach. I don't know how to tell you this, she said softly. Michael isn't here. 3 days ago, he was in a terrible car accident. He's in the hospital. He's in a coma. Her words shattered me. My heart dropped into an abyss I didn't know existed. I gripped the desk to steady myself, but my legs shook violently. My son, my only child, was lying unconscious in a hospital bed, and I hadn't even known. Maya reached out, steadying me by the arm. Let me take you to him. The drive to the hospital blurred into fragments, the hum of traffic, the flicker of stoplights, the low hum of Maya's voice as she explained what little she knew. Michael had been leaving work late when another driver struck his car. The police suspected it was a hit and run. The injuries were severe. He hadn't woken since. When we arrived, the hospital swallowed me in its sterile white walls and echoing hallways. The smell of disinfectant filled my nose as we rode the elevator to the intensive care unit. I wanted to run, to stop time, to escape the truth waiting for me. But I forced my feet forward. When we reached his room, I froze at the doorway. There was my son, my Michael, lying still, his body tangled in wires and tubes, machines beeping rhythmically beside him. His skin was pale, his lips cracked, his chest rising and falling only because the machines demanded it. I moved closer, my hands trembling as I reached for his. It was cold, far colder than I expected. Tears spilled freely as I whispered his name, hoping somehow he could hear me. Michael, it's Mom. I'm here. I sank into the chair beside his bed, staring at his still face. Memories crashed over me. His laughter as a boy, the way he clung to my hand on his first day of school, the joy in his eyes when he opened that secondhand tool set one Christmas morning. I remembered the long nights I stayed awake sewing patches on his clothes, the meals I skipped so he could eat. I remembered the sacrifices Arthur and I made so he could reach this very moment in life. And now here he was, successful, wealthy, and completely unreachable. Maya placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. He's strong, Dorothy. Don't give up hope. But inside, I felt a storm of emotions I couldn't name. Anger at his lies. Hurt from his neglect. Fear that he might never wake. And beneath it all, love. A love so fierce it rooted me to that chair, refusing to leave his side. As the machines hummed and the monitors beeped, I realized that my journey for answers had only just begun. The silence I had endured was nothing compared to the questions that now loomed before me. The days in the hospital blurred together. Morning light filtered weakly through the blinds, and evenings stretched into endless hours of watching the steady rise and fall of Michael's chest. I barely moved from the chair by his bed, afraid that if I stepped away, he might slip further from me. I held his hand, whispered prayers, and begged him to come back. Yet, as I sat there, grief and anger waged war inside me. I couldn't forget the sting of his refusal to help me after my surgery. I couldn't forget the dismissal when my house began to crumble. Those wounds were fresh, raw, and painful. But looking at him now, fragile, motionless, and silent, I felt my resentment dissolve into something deeper. Love. Fierce, unrelenting love. One afternoon, as I sat tracing the lines of his face with my eyes, the door creaked open. A young woman stepped inside, elegant but nervous. She carried a baby on her hip, no more than 6 months old. The sight stopped me cold. Her eyes fell on Michael, and her lips parted in a soft gasp. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, Is he going to be okay? I blinked, trying to process who she was. I'm not sure, I said cautiously. Who are you? She looked down at the baby, who cooed softly, then back at me. My name is Lena. This is Grace. Her voice trembled. She's Michael's daughter. For a moment, the world tilted. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst. Michael had a daughter? My son, who had shut me out, who had left me in silence, had a child I didn't even know existed? I stared at the baby in her arms, a beautiful little girl with a tuft of dark hair and bright blue eyes that seemed to pierce straight through me. She squirmed and reached a tiny hand toward the air. My granddaughter? I whispered, the word foreign and yet thrilling on my tongue. Lena nodded. Yes. Michael arranged for a surrogate. He always wanted a family, but he never had the time for a traditional relationship. I agreed to help him, and Grace was born 6 months ago. Tears burned my eyes. A granddaughter. I had dreamed for years of holding a grandchild, of passing down stories and recipes, of rocking a little one to sleep in my arms. And all this time, she had been here, living her first months of life without me even knowing she existed. The joy of discovery was quickly shadowed by anger. Why hadn't Michael told me? Why had he hidden something so important? The betrayal cut deep, reopening the wounds of neglect I had tried to heal. I looked at Lena, searching for answers. Did he ever plan to tell me? She nodded quickly. Yes. He wanted to wait until everything was stable, with the company, with his projects. He wanted to surprise you properly. He loved you, Dorothy. He talked about you often. Her words softened me, but only slightly. My heart still ached. I turned to look at Michael, lying helpless in the bed beside us. A man who had built an empire, who had created life, and yet couldn't bring himself to share any of it with me. Grace squirmed again, fussing softly, and Lena handed her to me. My hands shook as I cradled her, the weight of her small body both foreign and familiar. She smelled of baby powder and innocence. When she gripped my finger with surprising strength, something inside me broke open. Tears streamed down my face as I whispered, Hello, Grace. I'm your grandma. In that moment, the anger dimmed. This tiny life was a piece of Michael, a piece of me, a continuation of the love Arthur and I had poured into our family. No matter the secrets, no matter the hurt, Grace was a gift. Over the next days, Lena visited often, bringing bottles, blankets, and toys. We sat together by Michael's bedside, talking quietly while Grace played on a blanket spread across the floor. I learned about Lena's life, how she had agreed to the surrogacy to pay for her education, how she had no close family of her own, and how she felt a strange bond to Michael despite the unconventional arrangement. Slowly, I came to see her not as an outsider, but as part of the fragile, unexpected family forming around my son's hospital bed. Together, we took turns holding Grace, soothing her when she cried, laughing when she discovered her toes. In those small moments, the sterile room was filled with life. Still, when night came and Lena went home, the doubts returned. I sat in the dark, holding Michael's cold hand, torn between love and betrayal. I longed to ask him why he hadn't trusted me with his truth, why he had chosen silence over connection. But the machines answered in his place, steady and unchanging. I realized then that I had a choice. I could let bitterness consume me, or I could embrace what had been placed in front of me. A granddaughter who needed love, a woman who needed support, and a son who might one day open his eyes to find us waiting. As Grace gurgled in her sleep, I made my decision. I would not let the past define these moments. I would be present, I would be loving, and I would be strong. Because family, even in its most unexpected form, was still family. And so, to those of you listening to my story, I ask, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you let anger harden your heart, or would you open your arms to the new life placed before you? If this part of my journey touches you, if you've ever found hope in the middle of heartbreak, I ask you to like and share this story. Your support helps keep these tales alive, and it reminds me that none of us are truly alone. The nights in the hospital stretched longer than the days. During the day, Grace's laughter gave me strength, and Lena's companionship kept me steady. But when the sun sank and the room grew quiet, I sat alone with my thoughts. I would hold Michael's hand, tracing the lines of his knuckles, praying for some sign of life, and wondering what he had kept from me. One evening, as the machines hummed and the hallway outside fell silent, my eyes landed on something I hadn't noticed before. On the small table beside Michael's bed lay a black, leather-bound notebook. It was half open, as though someone had left it in a hurry. I hesitated. Reading it felt wrong, like invading his privacy. But my need for answers outweighed my guilt. Slowly, with trembling fingers, I reached for the notebook and opened it to the first page. The date was just days before the accident. Michael's handwriting, the same scrawl I remembered from school assignments and birthday cards, filled the lines. The very first sentence stopped my breath. I have to tell my mother the truth. I have to tell her about Lena, about Grace, and about the man who's trying to ruin me. My heart raced. I read on, each word pulling me deeper into a truth I hadn't imagined. Michael wrote about a man named Arthur Sterling. The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Arthur Sterling had once been a close family friend, a mentor to my late husband, and someone Michael had admired as a boy. I remembered his booming laugh, the way he would pat Michael on the back and call him champ. But the man described in the pages before me was not the kind figure from my memories. Michael detailed how he had partnered with Sterling on a groundbreaking software project designed to revolutionize urban planning. Michael was the creator, the mind behind the innovation, while Sterling was supposed to be the financial backer and public face. At first, everything seemed promising. But Michael soon discovered Sterling had been siphoning funds, lavish parties, expensive cars, and personal luxuries all paid for with money that wasn't his. When Michael confronted him, Sterling didn't apologize. Instead, he threatened him. He told Michael he would destroy his reputation, ruin his company, and take everything he had worked for. And, most chilling of all, Sterling threatened the people Michael loved, me, and now Grace. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Michael had been gathering evidence to expose Sterling. Emails, recordings, financial records, all cataloged carefully. He had planned to go to the authorities, but he feared Sterling's influence. The man had connections, power, and friends in high places. Michael wrote that he didn't know who he could trust. Then came the words that made my stomach churn. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Tears blurred my vision. My son's accident wasn't a tragic twist of fate, it was deliberate. Sterling had tried to silence him before he could reveal the truth. My Michael was lying in a coma not because of bad luck, but because of greed and betrayal. I pressed the notebook against my chest and sobbed until my body ached. Grief washed over me, but it quickly shifted into something sharper, hotter, and far more dangerous. Rage. I thought back to the sacrifices Arthur and I had made for Michael, the long nights and the empty stomachs. I thought of Michael's brilliance, his determination to build something lasting, and how it had been crushed by a man who pretended to be a friend. And I thought of Grace, the innocent child whose future Sterling had endangered with his threats. The anger lit a fire inside me. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a protector, a grandmother, and a woman who had endured too much to sit quietly while someone tried to destroy her family. I turned back to the final entries in the journal. Michael wrote about how close he was to exposing Sterling. He had stored evidence in hidden files, encrypted and protected, waiting for the right moment. He believed the proof was strong enough to bring Sterling down, but he feared he wouldn't survive long enough to use it. The last words on the page were seared into my memory. If I don't make it, Mom will know what to do. I stared at those words, my hands trembling. He had believed in me. He had trusted me to carry on his fight. My heart swelled with a mix of sorrow and determination. I looked over at him, lying motionless, and whispered, "I promise, Michael. I will not let him win. You have my word." From that moment forward, grief no longer ruled me. Rage did. And with that rage came resolve. Sterling thought he could steal my son's future, strip him of his hard work, and leave him broken. He thought he could silence him. But he hadn't counted on me. I wiped my tears, straightened my back, and clutched the journal like a weapon. The path ahead would not be easy. Sterling had power, money, and influence. But I had something stronger. The truth, a burning love for my son, and the will of a mother who refused to bow. That night, As Grace slept in Lena's arms and Michael lay unconscious, I made a vow. Sterling would pay for what he had done. He would face not just justice, but humiliation. I would expose him for the fraud he was, strip him of the power he prized, and ensure that everyone saw him for the monster he had become. I closed the notebook, slid it back onto the table, and leaned closer to Michael. Rest, my boy. Heal. Leave the rest to me. The night I finished reading Michael's journal, I knew I couldn't keep the truth to myself. The anger burning inside me demanded action. Sterling had stolen too much already, and I refused to let him win. But I also knew I couldn't face him alone. The next morning, I knocked on Agnes's door. She opened it, her sharp eyes scanning my face before I even spoke. We had been neighbors for years, sharing gardens, holidays, and quiet evenings on the porch. Agnes wasn't just kind. She was sharp, with a background in corporate law that she rarely spoke about. If anyone could help me, it was her. Inside her living room, I laid Michael's journal on the table and told her everything. I spoke of Sterling's threats, the stolen money, the accident that wasn't an accident. Agnes listened without interruption, her expression hardening with each detail. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, folded her arms, and said in a low, steady voice, "He tried to destroy your son. He nearly succeeded. But he made one mistake, he left you standing. We're going to make him regret it." Those words lit a spark of hope inside me. Together, we began planning. Our first task was to secure the evidence. Michael's journal hinted at encrypted files hidden on his computer. Agnes contacted an old colleague, a cybersecurity expert who owed her a favor. Within days, he managed to bypass the protections and unlock a hidden folder. What we found inside was staggering. Emails confirming Sterling's theft, bank records showing the misused funds, and even audio recordings of Sterling making threats. Agnes studied the documents like a general preparing for battle. "This is enough to bury him," she said grimly. "But we can't hand it quietly to the authorities. He has too many connections. If we go through the usual channels, it'll disappear. No, we need to take him down publicly. He needs to lose everything that matters to him. His reputation, his image, his power." We decided to leak the evidence to the press. But not just any journalist. Agnes knew a woman named Claire, a respected investigative reporter with a reputation for integrity. If anyone would run the story without fear, it was her. Meeting Claire was like meeting a force of nature. She studied every piece of evidence with sharp eyes, asked detailed questions, and made sure we weren't exaggerating. When she finally looked up from the stack of papers, her voice was firm. "This isn't just a scandal. This is criminal. Once this goes out, Sterling won't have a corner of this city left to hide in." We timed the release carefully. Sterling was set to receive a prestigious Architect of the Year award at a gala attended by business leaders, politicians, and media outlets. It was the perfect stage for his downfall. On the night of the ceremony, Agnes and I dressed in our best clothes and slipped into the audience. The room glittered with chandeliers and expensive gowns, but my focus was fixed on the stage where Sterling basked in the spotlight. He smiled broadly, shaking hands, soaking in the admiration he believed he deserved. As the master of ceremonies began his speech, phones in the audience started buzzing. One by one, heads bent over screens. Whispers spread through the crowd like wildfire. I saw faces shift from admiration to shock, then to disgust. The article Claire had published was live, front-page headlines exposing Sterling as a fraud, a thief, and a man tied to threats of violence. The master of ceremonies faltered as the giant screen behind him, meant to display Sterling's achievements, suddenly lit up with the article itself. Every damning word, every piece of evidence, blown up for the entire room to see. Gasps rippled across the hall. Someone booed. Then another. Sterling's smile faltered. His confident stride toward the podium slowed as he realized what was happening. The applause died. Murmurs grew louder. He turned to the screen, his face draining of color as the full scope of his betrayal stared back at him. The announcer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to recent developments, the committee has rescinded this award." The room erupted, not in cheers, but in jeers. Sterling's wife stood up from the front row, her face tight with fury, and stormed out without a word. Business partners, once eager to be seen at his side, stepped away, leaving him isolated under the glaring lights. I watched from my seat, my heart pounding with satisfaction. For the first time since I had found Michael lying helpless in that hospital bed, I felt powerful. Sterling's arrogance had crumbled into humiliation, and everyone saw it. He stumbled from the stage, his once proud shoulders hunched, his face a mask of anger and fear. The audience didn't applaud his exit. They whispered, they judged, and they condemned. His downfall had begun, and it was exactly the justice I had promised my son. In the days that followed, the consequences came swiftly. The story spread across news outlets and social media, drawing national attention. Sterling's clients abandoned him, his investors withdrew, and the authorities could no longer ignore the mountain of evidence. Investigations were launched, his assets frozen, and his name dragged through every headline. Through it all, I stayed by Michael's side, reading aloud from the very journal that had started it all. I wanted him to know that I had carried out his fight, that Sterling had been exposed, that justice was being served. Sometimes, in the quiet of the hospital room, I would glance at Grace playing on the floor and feel a rush of fierce pride. She would grow up knowing her father had built something great, and that no one, not even a man like Sterling, could take it away. I leaned over Michael one evening, whispering as he lay silent, "You trusted me to finish what you started." And I did. He's finished, son. He'll never hurt us again. Arthur Sterling's downfall spread faster than either Agnes or I expected. Once Claire's article hit the front page, the story snowballed into every paper, every news broadcast, and every business forum in the country. The man who had once strutted through rooms with his chin held high now had his face plastered across headlines with words like fraud, liar, and criminal. Within a week, his empire crumbled. Clients severed contracts, investors pulled their money, and colleagues who once praised him now rushed to distance themselves. The FBI announced a full-scale investigation into his finances, while local prosecutors prepared charges for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Arthur had built his career on charm and deception, but now every stone he had laid was turning into rubble. Worse for him, the humiliation was public. Every gala, every award, every handshake he had fought for had been stripped away. His wife, who had enjoyed his lavish spending, filed for divorce and refused to answer reporters' questions. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. He had wanted power more than anything, but in the end, his name became a cautionary tale whispered with disgust. For me, watching his empire collapse wasn't about vengeance alone. It was about justice. Each headline, each courtroom update, felt like a promise kept to Michael. Sterling had tried to silence my son, but instead, his own voice was drowned out by the roar of truth. While Sterling's life fell apart, a miracle began unfolding in Michael's hospital room. Weeks after the accident, I noticed the faintest squeeze of his fingers around mine. At first I thought it was my imagination, but then his eyelids fluttered. I gasped, calling for the nurse, my heart pounding with a hope I hadn't dared to feel. The doctors said recovery would be long, but his progress was undeniable. Slowly, day by day, he began to return to me. His voice was weak at first, his words slurred, but when he whispered, "Mom," I broke down in tears. Grace often lay curled against his chest as I sat beside him, her tiny hand resting on his arm. Sometimes I caught Michael staring at her with wonder, as if he couldn't believe she was real. In those moments, I felt the past wounds begin to heal. Yes, he had hidden things from me. Yes, his neglect had cut deep. But love has a way of bridging even the widest divides. I embraced my new role as grandmother with everything I had. I sang lullabies to Grace while rocking her in the same chair I once used for Michael. I fed her bottles in the quiet of the night, humming softly while the world outside slept. For the first time in years, my house felt alive again, with laughter, with warmth, with family. Michael's recovery was slow but steady. Physical therapy tested his strength, but he faced it with determination. With Lena's support and mine, he found the will to push forward. Watching him hold his daughter, whispering promises of the future, filled me with pride. Arthur Sterling, meanwhile, was convicted and sentenced to prison. He lost everything: his freedom, his wealth, his reputation. He died years later, alone and forgotten. But I rarely thought of him after the trial. He had taken enough of my energy. My focus was on the family in front of me: the son who fought his way back, the granddaughter who gave me new purpose, and the young woman who had stood by Michael when he needed it most. Life was not perfect, but it was whole again, and that, to me, was redemption. To you listening now, I ask, do you believe justice is worth fighting for even when the odds are stacked against you? Have you ever had to find strength in places you didn't know existed? If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more powerful tales of betrayal, resilience, and justice. And please share it with someone who needs reminding that no matter how dark things get, love and truth can light the way forward. Looking back on everything, I sometimes wonder how my heart managed to hold so many emotions at once. The pain of Michael's neglect nearly broke me. The silence, the unanswered calls, the moments when I questioned whether I still mattered, it all cut deeper than I can put into words. Betrayal leaves scars, and I carry them still. But alongside the pain came lessons. I learned that truth cannot stay buried forever. I learned that resilience, even in the body of a 72-year-old widow, is stronger than any threat a man like Sterling could make. And I learned that family, no matter how strained or wounded, is worth fighting for. Michael's journey taught me that people often hide their struggles, even from the ones they love most. He carried burdens he should have shared, and it nearly destroyed him. Yet even in his secrecy, his choices were guided by love for me and for Grace. That realization softened my anger and reminded me of something vital. Love is complicated, imperfect, and sometimes messy, but it is still love. The sweetest revenge, I discovered, isn't found in headlines or courtroom verdicts, though Sterling's fall was satisfying to witness. True revenge is living well despite those who tried to crush you. It's sitting in my living room, rocking my granddaughter to sleep, hearing Michael's laughter again as he recovers, and sharing meals with a family I once thought I'd lost. It's knowing that no matter what Sterling took, he could never destroy what mattered most: our love, our bond, our future. To those of you listening, I share my story not just as a tale of betrayal and justice, but as a reminder. You may have been hurt. You may have been abandoned by someone you trusted. But do not let bitterness be the final chapter. Hold fast to the truth. Cling to resilience. And above all, choose love, even when it's hard. Because love, once restored, has the power to heal wounds you thought would never close. As I close this chapter of my life, I want to thank you for listening. Your presence, your time, and your willingness to walk through this story with me mean more than words can say. May you carry this lesson into your own lives. Justice is sweet, but love is sweeter still. Until we meet again in the next tale, may your days be filled with strength, your nights with peace, and your heart with the kind of love that outlasts every storm. Goodbye, my dear friends, and remember, you are never alone.